Welcome back to Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and today we are looking at Revelation of the Daleks, the final Sixth Doctor story before his Trial of the Time Lord arc,
Mm-hmm.
the second last Dalek and Davros story of the classic era.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's like I alluded to this last week. It's an episode that leaves me like like I said, I really don't know what I think about this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Everything with Davros and the Daleks is really great. Everything else is like super confusing in certain parts. Really slow as well in the first episode. I don't know. It's a weird one. You mentioned that you know what you think of this, so you've left me and the audience suspense for a whole week. What are your initial thoughts on this one?
Um, yeah, I thought it was pretty fucking great. If
Oh,
I'm
okay.
totally honest, I know that this has, certainly by Colin Baker story standards, a pretty good reputation. I can
Yes.
understand why. I had seen it before I watched it to prepare for the podcast, but I didn't remember heaps of it because it was years and years ago. But I watched it and I really did enjoy it. I enjoyed it more than honestly, yeah, I enjoyed it more than Resurrection. Certainly on
Wow.
multiple watches, I enjoyed it more. I think that its combination of black comedy and horror is done pretty well. And your criticism of the first episode being slow, I can understand why you or anyone else would feel that way, but I wasn't bothered by it. Like, there's more happening in the second episode, sure, but I like all the characterizations that's happening in the first, and I think it helps to really set stuff up in the second. When you put it all together, I found the narrative to be pretty satisfying. And as you say, Davros and the Daleks are great. Honestly, with Davros, I think in terms of his characterization specifically, this is probably for me at least the best Davros story. Alongside Genesis, and maybe even better in terms of characterization. And there's a number of reasons why, and I'll obviously get into all of that. But yeah, overall, I did enjoy this story quite a lot.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So this is interesting.
Mm.
Okay, so during our recording break between season one and season two, I started cataloging all of our review scores.
Hmm.
I thought it would be interesting to see, when we agreed with each other, when we didn't, what our
Hmm.
like average scores for each episode, so we could sort of do a bit of a. At some point, I think it might be fun to do a bit of a retrospective and go, did we get it right with our initial scores now that we've had time away from the episodes to maybe think about
Hmm.
them a bit more? Which
Hmm.
episodes did we score the same? Are they even the same like quality when
Hmm.
putting that into mind? Do we want to just like change things slightly? We
Hmm.
might not, but I thought it might be fun to do eventually. But I bring this up because we have only let me see if I can find it. We have only once disagreed with each other to an extent of more than one point between us.
Hmm.
So normally when we don't come to the same score, it's normally like one above or one below. There is
Hmm.
only one time that we have disagreed with each other to a factor of two, and that's Boomtown.
Hmm.
Um, I think we might just beat that discrepancy this time.
Hmm. Now, very interesting.
Yeah, because you seem to really enjoy this one, and I don't fault you for that. I can see
Hmm.
why it's really good, but like I said, a lot of it just leaves me really cold.
Hmm.
I think that I mean I don't I again, this is going to be an interesting discussion. I
Yeah.
just watched it, and it's the episode that I've watched for the podcast that I think has the most, after watching it, left me going, okay, what was that?
Hmm.
Hopefully, I'll be able to articulate why as we
Sure. Sure.
progress. I just want to get into this timescales rankings
Sure
before
thing.
we do anything too big, because I think this will also help. 155 people voted, and this has an average rating of 8.
My gut reaction is to like put that honestly maybe a bit higher, but that's basically fair. I think. I
And
mean,
that's
my
interesting
thoughts
because
may change at the end of this, but
well, yeah,
okay.
that's fascinating because, like I said, we don't do things by halves. So for you
No.
to put this higher than an 8, it would have to be a 9 for you.
Yes. Again, that was more initial reaction because I've watched it
Sure.
twice in the last
Okay.
2 days. But yeah, like I want it to be like a 9, but an 8 feels about right,
Cool.
if that makes
Um,
sense.
yeah, you mentioned that this has a good reputation
Hmm.
among Colin Baker stories.
Hmm.
Um, on the timescale, this is listed as the third highest rated Sixth Doctor story. Now that's not completely fair because the first highest rated is Caves of Vendrazani, in which the Sixth Doctor only appears right at the end. So
Yeah,
that's
that
not doesn't count.
no.
So it's technically the second highest rated Sixth Doctor story.
I'd still believe that, but
Can you guess what the first highest rated is?
Vengeance on Varos.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's only ahead of this one, like marginally.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah, this is a really, really good reputation.
Mm.
I don't think I see it, but we'll
Mm-hmm.
get to that.
Mm-hmm.
8 for plot.
Honestly, I think it works pretty well. I think it's it's written by Eric Sayward again, which is interesting, and I
Yep.
think because he even has said, I'm pretty sure on that one of the problems with Resurrection was that there's just too much rushing around. The plot's a bit too cluttered. Here, I really feel like it's. I mean, I don't know if I'd call it streamlined, but I really feel the plot is more focused. And even though, as you say, it doesn't feel like a lot is happening in the first part, I think it's justified enough in the narrative, and it's it helps keeps the story focused in my view. So I think for me, the what did you say the rating for plot it was again?
8.
An 8. Yeah. Honestly, I think I'd say probably an 8. Yeah, like I don't know, maybe a little lower, but again, we don't really do things by halves. So yeah, I'd probably still stick with an 8 on that one.
8.2 for acting.
Um, yep,
I think
really.
this one's also fair, apart from the classic era continuing to overplay Dalek deaths.
Oh,
There are some
Vogel's
big
death,
ones in
yeah,
this. There are some
yeah.
very, very atrociously over the top Dalek deaths in this.
I don't
Um,
mind Bostock's death too much, but
which one is
Vogel's
Bostock
death.
again?
He was the squire for
Oh yeah, yeah. And Vogel is the sort of secretary.
Yes, yes, he's
Oh
the
yes,
second.
that's the death where he gets shot, flails around for about 5 seconds, and then has time to stop and look at
Look her in the eye. Look
look her
her
in
in
the
the
eye
eye.
and then collapse.
Well, here's the
That
funny. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say that is by far the worst Dalek death I've ever seen.
Well, the funny thing is, because what happened was, so I watched it again this morning, but then after that, I watched a couple of things. I watched a little bit of a documentary I've got called Davros Connections. It's part of the Davros collection. Quite good. It's got some interesting things to say. It also covers some of the Big Finish audio stories, which is really neat. But then I watched a bit of the making of documentary of Revelation of the Daleks, and the guy who played Vogel said that Graham Harper, the director, apparently that is basically what he told him, that yeah, it's like getting an electrical shock through the floor. And I think he even said that Harper told him, yeah, and then you got to kind of do slow mo near the end, and then you look her in the eye, and then you so um
Christ.
yeah, it would appear to be. It seems to be a deliberate choice, which is not great. I can understand why that would bother you. Yeah, like, and the thing is, I want to say I've seen worse Dalek deaths. Um, and I mean that may just be because I've seen a lot of classic Dalek stories, and we haven't covered all of them, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty bad.
It's one
Vogel's
of the
death.
few classic Whoisms that genuinely takes me out of the experience.
Yeah, fair enough.
Like I can look past the CGI, I can look past
Mm,
the nature of a lot of the plots, but
mm.
that kind of stuff takes me out so much because I don't see someone dying, I see someone acting like they're dying,
Yeah, sure.
and especially when it's like to the humorous extent that Vogel's one was.
Mm,
It removes a lot of the dark nature of the moment,
mm-hmm,
and again, it just made me laugh. It was just funny.
mm-hmm. Sure.
Speaking of effects, 7.8 for this one.
Um, yeah, think I think that's fairly fair. Most of the effects here are practical for perhaps
Yeah,
understandable reasons. There's a little
the
bit of
Dalek gunfire is a lot better in this than it was in Resurrection. It's a lot more
mm,
consistent, and they
mm,
can even do centralized light ups. Like when the Dalek for some
Hmm.
reason chooses to shoot the dude's uh, artificial leg rather than just
Hmm.
kill him.
Hmm.
Like
That it focuses
they
on, yeah,
it focuses on the leg as
which
opposed
is
to
quite
like
good.
lighting up all of them.
Um,
Yeah,
and even other things, I think they are using like really early primitive CGI when the Dalek is kind of forming, like the glass
yeah,
Dalek
yeah,
is becoming the Dalek, and it looks a bit fake, but it kind of works, I think, for the story that's being told, and because it's classic Who, it is almost like a Dalek being downloaded, I guess. So it just manages to work for me. And again, a lot of it is done with practical effects. Natasha's father as this horrible disfigured Dalek mutant looks really great and wonderfully icky.
yeah. It
The
looks really nice
the the
actually.
metal teeth is just such a wonderful, oh, just nauseating detail. It's great. Seeing that thing. Um, the bit where Davros gets his hand fucking shot off, it's just a bit nutty.
Even the way they do Davros as just a head in the thing, like it's not a terrible effect. It actually looks pretty neat. It's convincing enough that it is just a head in a thing swiveling around. Like there are a couple moments when Terry
Mm.
Malloy kind of swivels around a bit too fast and has to double back. But like it never seems very clunky at all.
Mm. Yeah, it's and even like when that head gets shot and it just sort of crumples,
Mm.
that you could argue is a bit unconvincing. But then you find out, oh no, he was the man behind the curtain all along. So
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
actually, it's really bizarre when you think about sort of the Wizard of Oz parallels there. But
Yeah.
that's a whole other thing.
Actually, we also we failed to mention this last week, but I think this is the most convincing Davros mask of the classic series. Like the way it just fits on Terry Malloy's head, it's really
Yeah,
nice.
yeah. I mean, Michael Wish's one is pretty good, but I think that's probably because I'm enamored by his performance.
Yeah, but I think like just the makeup of this mask, it looks a lot
Yeah.
cleaner. And from memory, the Davros mask in Remembrance is atrocious. So I'll see if that is as I remember it when we
Yeah,
do
I
it again in
remember it
2 weeks.
being not great either. You know, it is what it is, I guess. But I think, yeah, I think this mask is better than it was in Resurrection,
Mm.
which is interesting. Oh, also small things with Davros's special effects. The Sith lightning that he's got out of his
Yep.
eye and out of his hands. Again, looks a bit fake, but it works well enough for what the show's trying to do.
Yeah.
It helps with the cartoonish nature. And by the way, I being pretentious as I am, when we did Dalek, I'm like, oh, this isn't the first story where a Dalek floats. No, that's Remembrance, but technically
It's here. Yeah.
it's here, which is really strange because it doesn't really have anything to do with the plot. I mean, you could argue it gives Davros sort of maybe the upper hand in that one moment when he's fighting people, but it doesn't work into the plot much. Even it works into the plot even less so than it does in Remembrance when you've got the Dalek literally flying up the stairs. So it's quite strange how that works. But again, like the effect itself, it doesn't look great. But again, I'm willing to forgive it. That's just part and parcel of classic Who, and it works with the stylized tone. Same with the weaponized rock and roll that the TJ's using.
Yeah. I
It
mean,
looks that look fake as well, but
it
still
does, and
fun, good stuff.
I mean we'll get to that, but Jesus
Yeah, yeah.
Christ. 7.8 for replay.
Um, no, well, again, we don't do things for hours. Yeah, I guess that's about right. I'd say like an 8 for replay value. I enjoyed it almost as much as it did the first time.
Sure.
Hmm.
14 people out of 76 say this requires a previous story. You do need to know who Davros is. It's
Yeah, I mean they do his characterization pretty damn well here, but you really need that context and knowing that he created the Daleks to really get the antagonism of him, and also why he's kind of so feared by these other characters.
yeah,
I
exactly. Because
think.
before that, you're just if you don't know who Davros is, you're just like he's ahead.
Yeah,
Why do we?
he's ahead. Again, they do a pretty good job of that. They show how kind of manipulative and commanding, I suppose, he can be, even just as a head, but again, the illusion gets a bit broken if you don't have that context to fit it in.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, Now I'm going to read out the synopsis.
Mm-hmm.
The Doctor and Perry arrive on the planet Necros, where in a facility called Tranquil Repose, presided over by Mr. Jobel and his assistant Tassenbecker, the wealthy can have their newly deceased bodies cryogenically frozen until such a time as medical science can cure whatever killed them. The Doctor wishes to pay his last respects to his friend Professor Arthur Stengos, and also to assuage some nagging suspicions about the man's death. His suspicions prove justified, as it turns out that this is just a ruse to lure him into a trap. The great healer masterminding the Tranquil Repose is Davros, who is using the organic material in the cryogenic storage units both as the raw material for the synthetic food that is Necros' biggest export, and also to create a whole new army of Daleks with which to take control of the universe. Davros' plans are foiled when Daleks, loyal to the Dalek Supreme, arrive on Necros and take him prisoner. The Doctor suggests to the planet's inhabitants a new basis for their economy.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yep, that's...
Yep. I mean, there is quite a bit that this synopsis doesn't tell you. And a lot of that stuff is the stuff that I have issue with. That for me, there's just a lot of incidental stuff that doesn't really make sense to be here. Like my understanding of it is that it's like it's not technically a funeral home, but or like something like that, but it's sort of like the closest approximation that we have.
Yeah.
So, like, if it is a funeral home, why are they also in charge of protein export? And why do they have a DJ on site? Like, a lot of the stuff kind of feels like it's not very well thought out world building. It just sort of seems like, well, it's a funeral home, and also there's this other stuff here because the plot needs there to be. I mean, I'm willing to admit there may have been something I missed, because, like I said, the first episode was quite slow, and I was tuning out a fair bit. I tried not to, but it happens. Is there anything that you can tell me about how this facility works that maybe I might not have picked up on?
So they do give a reason as to why the DJ's there, and it's so that the people who are in, I mean, they didn't, I forgot the exact term for it, but it's essentially kind of like a cryogenic stasis sort of a thing. They're waiting to be reawakened. He's there to feed them, basically local news, essentially, so that they don't miss anything when they wake up again. And
sure.
He's part of an extra service. Tassenbeker says that yeah, for extra, if you pay a little extra, you can get something that's a bit more entertaining, and cue the DJ. So that's why that's
okay.
There.
But then my question would be, like, do they ever show the DJ giving news that isn't like, oh, and here's a cute girl coming your way, I wonder who she's coming here for? Like, do the people who are waiting in stasis really need to know that much? Like, surely it would be like news relating to where they're from, like what, like current affairs. Maybe if you were so inclined, sports news, if you were that kind of guy. Like, why do they need to know, oh, and why does the DJ tell them that there are body snatchers in the facility? Surely that would panic them if that's his role. If he's there to provide comfort, why would he say, and there's someone coming that might be trying to steal you, so you don't get to do what you paid to do?
I think it's meant to, and we have probably mentioned similar stuff like this before with Doctor Who. I think it's more an element of characterization, because when you get the feeling that he likes doing the American impression. He says as much, but he realizes the facade that this whole thing is, and that I think is the big thing here. It's
Okay.
It's more a character and thematic concern, because the issue of pretentiousness and facades, that's the theme that really hangs over the whole story.
Yeah,
That's
true.
what it's all about. It's all about how this beautiful looking place hides really dark secrets, and frustrated employees, to put it mildly, and horrible treatment of intruders, and also of the people they're supposedly looking after, and the fact that Davros is taking, well, maybe not half, but a lot of these people and turning them to food. So that's a whole thing.
Yeah,
It, yeah, I think so. Those elements,
I guess for me, my
hmm,
whole thing was like, is this an alien world or is this a human colony on an alien world?
I imagine a human colony. Um,
Sure. Is it
hmm,
in the future then?
yeah,
Okay, so how far in the future? Because my question for that is why do they care? Well, why are they saying stuff like 60s when surely this would be centuries ago in the future? Like, which 60s are you referring to here?
hmm. I did actually look this up. Oh yeah, no, I've got it here. Hang on. Should be. Um, Oh yeah, here we go. Yeah, it's set. It says main setting: Tranquil Repose, Necros, post 5590.
Okay, so what the
Presumably.
fuck are the 60s meant to be then?
What line was that? Just remind
It
me.
was super early. Like
Mm,
one of the first times we see the DJ, he's talking about like, and I think Good Vibration is playing at the time.
yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, we're giving you the sounds of the '60s or something to that effect." He definitely uses the word '60s, and
Huh.
so if it's set 5,000 or 3,000 rather years in the future, the
Mm,
use of the term '60s makes no
mm,
goddamn sense.
mm. Um, I can understand that. I feel like. I mean, I don't know if I'd say that's a nitpick, but it's not something that hugely bothers me. I think the way the facility works, I think, is, you know, it's obviously just being used as like a front to just to export the meat of people, right? And it means that even for the people who used to like working there, like Tarkus, he's just sort of assimilated into this position where, how should I phrase this? Like no one really cares that much, and so when the DJ says random shit like, "Oh yeah, music from the '60s," he's only doing that because he loves music from the 1960s,
Yeah,
and
sure, but at that point,
mm,
say 1960. I just looked
mm,
up the moment. It's actually when he's dressed as Elvis, and he says
mm,
like it's some celebrating So George from her heart to your heart,
yeah,
celebrating your long life. It's some
mm,
good old 50s Earth time rock and roll.
mm,
Just say 1950s.
mm,
Christ, like fix that one small thing and that nitpick goes away. But
mm,
having it just say 50s is
mm,
part of
mm,
why in my head I was like, what is the world building here? Like,
mm,
what are they doing?
mm,
It's
mm,
one of the things that made a lot of the episodes seem really unfocused and not very well thought out.
mm,
When you throw in a term like 50s, when your thing is set thousands of years in the future, to me
mm,
that instantly telegraphs, okay, this didn't have much thought put into it because
mm,
otherwise they wouldn't have left that in.
mm, mm. Um, Look, yeah, it's a fair enough criticism. It's not something that really bothers me. For me, the broader dramatic punchlines that the story's hitting, that is sort of more where my focus is drawn, I suppose.
Sure,
You're
yeah, and
not wrong in.
those aren't without merit or examination.
Mm,
I'm willing to admit that, especially now that you've talked through, like, the the facade of this place being a major
yeah,
theme. I'm more on board with it than I was,
sure.
but it's just a really really small thing that irked me.
Mm-hmm. Sure thing. Yeah. Again, doesn't bother me terribly, but yes, I can understand why. Because as you say, it wouldn't have taken a lot for Eric Sayward to fix that up, especially given that there's a later conversation between Perry and the DJ um, where he's like, "Oh, the United States from Earth." There's an implication that no one like lives on Earth anymore, but they don't explain what that is. So yes, I can understand why small details like that may bother you or anyone else for that matter.
Yeah,
Mm,
like I said, like that was also really early in the episode, and that
mm,
it was a moment that for me sort of set a little snowball rolling, and then
hmm and then
especially
it just sort of
yeah,
grew.
well, especially because at the time I was like, what is this DJ? This is so out of place.
hmm
Why is this funeral home producing protein as well? Why are they a food export as well as a funeral home?
Mm.
I don't know if that was quite firmly established or not.
I mean, the main justification as to why, like, food export they give, um, maybe not as strong as it could be, but yeah, is that the galaxy is expanding and there's a lot of famine, and that's how Davros is able to kind of get a foothold.
Yeah, but like
As
in
mm,
my mind, like that is an element of world building that seems fine when you first examine it. But then
hmm
in my head, I'm thinking, okay, so the galaxy's expanding. That means the amount of planets you're on is also expanding, which should surely mean that the amount of farmland you've got is also expanding.
um,
Like, especially if it's talking about the galaxy expanding, which I assume is referring to the human empire, like sprawling out across multiple new
hmm,
planets. Why is the famine cured by one planet producing uh,
mm, hmm
all this food? Like, surely it would be like a conglomeration of different planets. It would be more of a government thing. It would be like
mm,
the Shadow Proclamation or something like that
mm,
that would be
mm,
trying to sort it out, not this one planet.
mm,
I don't know. Like
sure.
for me that just really didn't sit right.
hmm Um,
I mean, it's all
mm,
there in service of
mm,
what is the reveal that Davros has been, Soylent Green is people. He's been Soylent Greening
yeah,
the he's been
yeah,
Soylent Greening the poor,
yeah,
um, which is a genuinely chilling moment.
yeah.
Um, it just makes me, but at the same time, it just made me wish that those two story elements were better integrated before that point, because
hmm
at that point it just sort of made me go. It didn't leave with me like the sense of like, that feeling in your guts where you're like, oh, that's wrong, like that's
mm,
crook. It
mm,
just left me with oh, okay, so that's why they referenced that before.
mm,
It sort of felt like the snake eating its own tail, where it
hmm
was like, why did you include this element? Oh, so we can pay it off later. But you wouldn't have to pay it off later if you didn't include that element in the first place. You could have just had Davros. If it's already a facility for the wealthy, you could have just had him converting all of the people who are there into Daleks. Then you'd have a bigger army, and you wouldn't have to add in an extra plot point that, in my opinion, still doesn't quite pass the smell test when you consider the world building that goes into it,
mm.
in order to justify that moment.
Well, he doesn't like this may be taken care of with what you've just said, but like he does say that he's like he's selling this meat, like he's trying to get more money from Kara to finance his experiments to make more Daleks. But as you say, does it
That's true,
all
yeah.
still fit together?
It
Um,
could, yeah. I mean, look, there is a way you can have that as a part of your story,
mhm.
but have it make a bit more sense. Like maybe he's been like doing maybe instead of producing a food source for the galaxy, he's been maybe he's the one responsible for uh, he's claiming that he's one of the people uh, researching and producing cures for what the people have been freezing themselves to
Mm,
cure. Like he was doing somewhat in Resurrection, where
mm,
he under the guise of working on a Mavellan cure or a cure for the Mavellan virus, he is instead growing his army. You could
mm.
do a similar thing here, where under the guise of being a scientist or a doctor
Or the
researching
Great
how to,
Healer.
or the great healer, which he's supposedly set himself up as.
But
We don't actually see him doing any like fake
no, but
great
they
healing.
do they they do establish. I'm pretty sure. Like near the end, Davros says, yeah, I have been, I think it does say that he's been helping to cure different
Well,
forms of disease. Well, it doesn't. They're still winding up as Daleks or
yeah,
food,
yeah.
so.
We don't see him cure anyone, and obviously
Mm,
he has no intention of curing anyone. But if he's already thrown that out there, why not just have that be it?
mm,
Like you could just
mhm.
have it go. Maybe that conversation between him and, is it Kara?
Yes.
Okay, maybe the conversation with them goes like, I need more funding. Oh, but Davros, you haven't actually produced any cures yet. We're
Mm,
getting impatient. Well, that's why I need more funding, because this isn't quite you know, it's taking more time. These people have really, you know, I don't have a farm of thousands of people I can infect with every disease in the galaxy, so I can research cures. I don't have those kind of resources. I need more funding. Okay, well, what can you give us in return? I don't know. I can maybe tinker with the facilities a little bit, make things a bit nicer. I can cut costs, but in return, those costs go to me. Like, there are ways you can do that without, I think, sacrificing, in my opinion, elements of your world building in order to introduce a new element of funding for Davros. I don't know. For me, it just wasn't as clean as I would have liked it to have been. And for me, the resolution that I got to something that didn't stick out was something that only resolved the thing that didn't stick out. It didn't really factor into enough of the other story elements to make me go, okay, this was justified.
I'm pretty sure he does say that he needs the money for research, but as you say, that's kind of a different thing to showing any evidence of the research.
Well, again, but then there's the case of like, if that's all he does, then if that's his ruse, then why also produce the protein that is sent out? Like that's not a necessary step in his plan.
Sure. I think, admittedly, there's elements of the plot and even with the world building that I hadn't thought of. And I mean, I hope this doesn't sound like a cop-out. For me, certainly in terms of pure enjoyment, it comes from, again, those thematic concerns and how they fit in with the characters. Because
Sure,
I
yeah.
actually really enjoy seeing these characters on screen because they're all they all have, or most of them at least have that element of facade to them. Whether you have Davros literally having a robot head of himself, or
yeah.
the workers on Necros having their own sort of agendas. You've got Kara, who seems sort of constantly duplicitous.
Yeah.
You've Jesus fucking Christ. You've got fucking Mr. Jobel. Okay,
Yeah, what a creep.
I was gonna say I wrote it down. I wrote it down. This is what I'm quoting directly what I wrote down here. I said, Christ, Joe Bell is a fucking creep. I hate this character so much, and it was so unbelievably satisfying when he got stabbed in the fucking chest. That was great.
Yeah, I agree.
He's just a freak. My God, like, oh God, there's so much to unpack there.
I
But
like it's a small thing as well, but I also like, obviously the nature of his death is incredibly poetic and satisfying. But I think it just as poetic and satisfying is when he has to floor his wig falling off.
yes,
or his
the toupee falls off. Absolutely. That was
Beautiful moment.
such a great idea. And again, it helps with those thematic concerns. It is about the facade. We see this nasty little repulsive toad of a man for who he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to say that bald people are repulsive, but he's gone to an effort to cover it up, so he's clearly ashamed
Yeah.
by it, robbing
Yeah.
him of that in his final moments.
It's the duplicity
yes.
element of it, which is why I think that death works as well as it does.
It does. Yeah.
So for me, and even with the DJ, though your criticisms over some of the world building of like why he's there, it does make sense. But for me, certainly on the enjoyment level, it's more about, it's kind of like the element of satire to it, I guess. I think
the DJ I'm more on board with now that
Sure.
I remember the justification. What I'm
Sure.
not on board with is the rock and roll gun. Like, that is clearly 80s wacky shit that they just tossed in there.
I liked it. I thought, like, okay, so explain to me what specifically bothers you about that, because I'm kind of fascinated.
It's just the justification of it. Like, they didn't bother saying like it converts. Like, if they just said like it converts sound particles into a high frequency wavelength, like, that would have been one thing. But just calling it a rock and roll gun.
No, I'm pretty sure he does say that. It's like an like an ultrasonic concentrated beam of sound. of the music that he's playing. I think that they do give that justification for it. Um, yeah, I'm pretty sure he does.
I've got the transcript open.
Oh, sure.
It's a highly no. What he says it's a highly directional ultrasonic beam of rock and roll.
Mm.
He doesn't say sound waves. He says rock and roll, and sure that's his character. Like he's fascinated by that era, but like for me, it's like, would this character know how to? Did he build it or did he buy it? Like, and if he bought it, why is that item commercially available? Like, it's for me. It's just another thing where it's like, have they thought this element of the world building through enough, or have they just put it in because it's a cool thing to give this character? Like, I'm willing to accept that him saying that is just an affectation of his character. I'm fine with that. But did he build it? And if he did, how is he that intelligent? Because the character we get presented with isn't that. He's not a creator. He's like, he's an imitator.
Yeah,
it's another really small thing, but like my main criticisms of this episode is just a whole lot of small things. You know, it's like being slowly crushed by 10,000 rocks. You know, like
yeah,
the
little
first rock, maybe
little
you
things
don't
adding
feel
up.
it, but yeah, exactly, like it crushing over time. And I just kept noticing smaller and small things, and then all of a sudden, this episode it collapsed. Like I said, a couple of those rocks have been alleviated, but there are still quite a few many to sift through for me.
I think I feel like there's an implication that he probably did build it. I do see what you mean. That like that in itself would have been not too much trouble to fix. So, like if they had him say, "Oh, I built this," I mean, maybe it may not have been perfect, but it would still like have added a little bit to it. I think you could, yeah, maybe you could argue that the assumption was the audience would just forget that kind of world building because it is a pretty intense scene because the Daleks are attacking and there's shit going on downstairs and it's a high stakes situation. So
yeah, I
it
also
just
think
kind
like
of all
at
fits.
the time I was watching that scene, I still didn't have the context of like why he was there. So when he said that, I was just like, oh come on, but it's not as bad as I initially thought it was. It's not.
Sure.
It's no longer like. It's no longer something that I look at and go, why? But it's something that I look at and go, wait, why?
Yeah, fair enough. And I think, again, this is true with the DJ's sort of broader characterization and to an extent the world building. It's like he's become like he does enjoy playing these characters, but he's become like really cynical, and it's almost like he's bored, I guess. So he's like, "Oh, we've got two random people coming on the property. I'm gonna put a running commentary on that because you're all asleep, and that's just what I can do. You paid for this premium service, but whatever. I'm in control now." So I
Sure,
think
yeah.
that's admittedly perhaps some flaws in terms of world building and even narrative, but more in terms of characterization is the main focus. It's very funny, but something else I wrote down here, and I didn't notice this until I watched it the second time because I had the subtitles on, just as it happens. I'm gonna get this caught up. One of the earliest things he says, which made me laugh a little bit, was "Now vidi this," and I'm absolutely convinced that that's a Clockwork Orange reference. I can't think of any time that word has been used in any form of fiction before that. But beyond being just a fun little Easter egg, I guess, that actually for me kind of speaks to what more of the focus is here. It's kind of, I think it's similar to what I've said before about stories that where the narrative isn't the most important element, and that's certainly true in a lot of horror stories.
Yeah.
Incidentally, I'd be quite curious to see what you think of Ghostlight, because that I think goes even further in a lot of ways. But anyway, I do think, like I think I mentioned it mixes black comedy and horror. I'm getting that phrase from the Dalek tapes documentary, but I do think it's true. I think there is a level of cartoonish satire here that is, yes, sacrificing some world building and even some narrative elements, but for me, um, because the world building, shaky though it may be, and the style is so confident, regardless of how successful it may be, it's still really selling it for me.
Sure.
And all these things work together well enough for me to make it really quite narratively satisfying. And I really enjoy. I mean, like, I know I've just said I called Jobel disgusting creep, which he definitely is.
Oh yeah.
But he, like, as a character, is quite interesting and rich, and his interactions with, especially Tassin Baker, is really good. There's a wonderful tragedy there, and all the like again the fact that all the characters have these sort of ulterior agendas makes them kind of wonderfully confounding. I love the fact that because I think even Eric Saywood said when I watched the making of documentary that one of the reasons Kara is there is to be kind of like a maybe not a foil, but another opposing force to Davros. Like he wanted
Yeah.
someone that's going to be scheming against him.
Sure. Yeah.
In Resurrection, they did have that, but it was a Supreme Dalek. Here, it's another, it's a humanoid. It's someone who maybe has a bit more creativity than the Daleks. Someone who's
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
a guile to her. And I know that I can't remember. It might have been like the head of the costume department, or someone in that area wanted to make her like the evil queen in Snow White, which definitely makes sense because she looks like that.
Yeah.
So the point is, these little things, they all come together and work well enough together for me to make it really narratively satisfying. And even though, again, that first part is a bit slower, I still enjoy it well enough. I think maybe it's because I've already seen the story and I knew where the relationship between Joe Bell and Tassin Baker was going to go, but
Sure. Yeah.
it was just really enjoyable just watching sort of the foreshadowing, knowing where that was going to lead.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Which was pretty good.
I'll say it's nice to see the Davros versus Daleks plot sort of subtly expanded on. Because Davros's motivation by the end of Resurrection was I want to build new Daleks, better Daleks, and we're seeing that here,
Yeah.
and I think it's going to lead into Remembrance quite nicely. Because I think it's a great examination of two opposing fascist mentalities.
Yeah.
You've got Davros being like, I'm creating the supreme being, the ultimate life form, the most advanced creature that ever exists, and the Daleks going, we don't care, it's not a Dalek, kill it. It's not
Yeah,
Dalek
we're
enough,
the
it
we're the
deserves to
supreme
die.
beings. What are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
the fact that they're, and I think it's telling as well that the old Daleks and the new Daleks, they're virtually identical. They're so similar to each other, but they just can't look past
Yeah.
the minute differences that they have. It's almost I really don't want to say that it's really fitting that there's like a. I was about to say something, and I don't think I believe in it anymore. But the fact that some of them are white and some of them are black, and then that's the conflict. That's clearly not the allegory they're going for. But like,
But that element of racial hatred and as we've said before with the Daleks, their really disturbing obsession with sort of genetic purity, that's a massive factor there, and it would
it's
become
an example. It's an example of like superficial differences that mean nothing that some people just can't look past in their ridiculous beliefs.
Yeah. And it would get expanded on further in Remembrance.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting. So I think I do want to talk about the characters here, but we're probably better off doing it one by one. Do you want to start with Davros?
Yeah, he's still really good in this. He's just his regular Davros self. There's a lot more of the scheming. There's a lot more of the, he's got that element of I'm one step ahead of everyone. I'm being utilitarian. I'm being megalomaniacal. I'm feeding people to people, which is something that I am doing just as a joke, I guess. I'm building a statue of the Doctor again, just for a laugh, I've already lured him here, but I might, and he's already going to investigate. But hey, this big statue, that'll get under his skin for maybe like 2 minutes, and that'll be fun.
It's yeah. So I really like his characterization in this story. Granted, um, some of that may be coming from a place of a bit of bias because I know quite a lot of behind the scenes elements of this story. One of them was that, and both Eric Saywood and Terry Malloy have said this, was they were really interested in exploring Davros in a on a multitude of levels because he's a ranter, that's just part of his personality, but
Yeah.
he's doing a lot more here. And
Yes, he is.
Terry Malloy said in terms of a performance he was very keen to bring it down to a very low level, in terms of vocal volume,
Well, yeah.
and really
There's not a lot of big screaming matches in this one like there was in
yeah.
Resurrection.
Yeah, he does. Again, he rants a little bit in the end, but really before that, and certainly when he's just the head, he he's being wonderfully manipulative and conniving, and more so, I think, than he was in Resurrection. It's just really great to see those characterizations sort of come forth. Seeing again, it's about facades, it's about layers on layers. The relationship he has with Tassenbeaker in particular is really compelling, albeit very disturbing in a lot of ways. The fact that he's clearly taking advantage of her emotional vulnerability,
Yes.
and it's just for me those little nuances are really really spectacular, which is why again I say this is really I think it's tied for me in terms of Davros characterizations with Genesis, and in some ways maybe even better, because they really are being dedicated to teasing out all these interesting elements and giving him a multitude of dimensions.
I I think I've preferred Davros in other Davros stories that we've looked at,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
this certainly isn't. Uh, it's pretty close. Like I think I prefer to explore like the deluded nature of his fascistic uh, mindset. I prefer when
Sure.
that kind of stuff is explored a bit more.
Hmm.
But it's not that it's not a terrible thing to shine a light on other parts of his personality.
Yeah.
It makes him a more rounded dictator,
Mm.
and it's fun to explore it in this story. I think it fits into, especially when we're looking at the facade of it all. It really
Mm.
fits into that element of the story really nicely because that is an element of the character that's existed for ever since he was introduced. The two
Yeah.
faced nature of the guy.
Yeah.
He'll bomb.
Absolutely.
He'll smooth talk his enemies to bomb his own city and then turn everyone
Yeah.
into Daleks just because
Yeah.
people were starting to investigate him. Like
Absolutely.
he will go to any lengths and he
Hmm.
will say whatever he needs to say, and I think that's on full force here.
Hmm. Um. Yes, I'd agree. And I'd be interested, and I know we've touched on this before, but it would be kind of cool at some point to look at some of the big Finish audio stories because there's a couple. There are two in particular that I think would be worth exploring. One is I Davros, where you see
Yep.
it's basically Davros's life story. It starts from when he's a kid, and it ends when he creates the first Dalek. And it's a very, as I said, it's dark and really fucked up, but it's a very interesting, quite a good story in itself. There's the other one that's good to explore is one that's just called Davros. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason why that's quite interesting is because it's got the Doctor, it's got Davros, but there are no Daleks at all. And most of it is a lot of bits of dialogue between Davros and the Doctor, and really interesting bits of characterization. The sorts of things I would more expect in a revival story, incidentally. So it's very interesting for that alone. He also gives this really interesting and despite the fact that he's an awful person, a weirdly compelling speech at the beginning of the story. So that's a whole thing. And he also does play up the manipulative side because he's trying to, manipulate everybody around him. That also, as I've touched on before, gets expanded on in the Juggernauts, where he creates this reality perception filter where everyone thinks he's Dr. Vaso, the kindly scientist that's helping this human outpost. So
Yeah.
anyway, the point is that duplicity and those extra layers that do get explored really more in the Big Finish audio productions, it's still nice to see it done here. And I do understand why you prefer the more, I suppose, politicized elements of his characterization in showing the evils of fascism for what it is. I agree with that. I think that's great. But I also really like, when they're taking a bit of a break and they're doing something, a little different.
Yeah.
Like when he says to Tassenbeek, if someone had treated me the way Jobel has treated you, I think I would have killed them. It's
Mm.
interesting because I think there are a couple of things going on there. Because on one hand, you could just assume that he's lying, right? Yeah, that he's just trying to manipulate Tassenbeek to do his will, which makes perfect sense. And that he doesn't give a shit about her. Well, that makes sense. She gets killed by a Dalek in the end, but that he's just doing this to manipulate the situation. But it's one of those great little bits in the story where you're able to pause and think, oh, actually, maybe he's being more serious than he thinks he is. Like maybe he actually doesn't like the very vain, fraudulent manipulations of Joe Bell. Maybe in his mind he rationalizes that his manipulations they're I don't know, more refined, I guess, and for
Well,
him that's some justification.
we're talking about Tassin Baker, right?
Yes.
Yeah. For me, it's like there's an element of self-loathing to the character, right?
Mm.
Like I think there's something really tragic about. Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if this is like what the character is, but the way I interpret it is like I hate who I am as a person. Like there's a lot of people have this kind of self-loathing.
Mm.
I hate myself, and this person is insulting me, and I'm equating those two feelings in maybe an inappropriate way, and then I'm attributing that to like you're the only person that says it like I know it is, or maybe like I don't know,
Oh,
like
sorry,
that.
no, I may have been confused. No, I meant like Davros is comparing the way he manipulates people to the way
Oh right, yeah, yeah,
Jobel
yeah.
manipulates people.
Well, I'm more
Um,
referring to Tassim Baker's like arc around like
yes, 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 yes.
getting that disgusting creep out of her life.
Yeah.
Like the fact that when I look at that nature of the arc about if it is that the self-loathing and then equating the hatred coming from someone else and then conflating the two and then falling in love with it as a result to then like fight back against that and go, no, you're an asshole,
Mm.
nothing you're saying is
Mm.
true. I think it's a really nice moment for her.
Mm.
It's a shame that she gets killed immediately after it.
Mm. Um, and it makes the whole thing more bleak, and
It
kind of,
does,
and it
yeah.
does sort of reinforce the idea that it was on Davros's part just a entirely vain manipulation.
It does, yeah. Like
Which
it
is
gives her that victory and then
and
it
then snatches
goes
it away.
exactly, yeah.
Um, which is quite good. Speaking of which, yeah, do you want to talk about Tassin Baker and her relationship with Jobel? Because
I mean, I think I
that's
just
a whole
did, but
thing.
I've covered
Mm.
it.
Mm.
It's I mean I've seen it. I mean you can see it where it's like I mean not to this extent, but like those really one-sided dynamics where it's like one person is clearly putting in more affection than the other, and the other is treating them like shit, but they're still like tied together regardless. It's not the exact same thing, but I've seen that kind of dynamic before. It's always really sad when it
Mm.
happens, and getting an arc where someone gets to rebel against that it's nice, even if it isn't a huge focus.
Mm. Well, yeah, there are a few things I would say about it.
I mean, it's not
So,
great that that's basically her only defining character trait is
mm,
a relationship with a man.
mm,
It would have been nice if they could have given her a bit more than that, but
I think God, what I think they were trying to do something more with the character. I'm just going off what I watched on the making
more
of
behind the scenes
documentary, but
stuff.
they didn't have time, or
Yeah, I
they
could believe
cut.
that.
Yeah, like something happened where there was meant to be more of her characterization, and I think Eric Saywood said it was more to sort of underlie or underscore the tragedy, but I think, yeah, they just didn't have time. And there are interesting bits where she's actually being quite commanding and sort of, you know, commanding her underlings to sort of, get back to work and things like that.
Yeah,
But that doesn't really get explored all that much. It's just kind of there. So you definitely get the feeling, oh, there's probably. And they did show in the documentary like an extra scene that didn't get that they shot but didn't get aired. So the impression you get is that maybe there was more to this character that they just maybe cut out for time constraints.
Well, I think it might also be like there are elements of that where like
Mm,
shortly after uh she gets what's the word, abused is the word I'm going to use.
mm,
It's not the right one,
mm,
but abused by Jobel. She then goes and abuses her underlings, and
mm,
but and I think that is sort of like another arc where it's like if don't take your aggression out on the wrong source, you know.
mm,
Like
mm.
if someone's giving you shit, don't go and give shit to other people. If you're
Yeah,
gonna give shit to
it's
anyone, you
the
should
it's
give
that
shit
vicious
right
cycle.
back. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Um.
And maybe that's another reason. Like when she completes the loop, I guess, and like kills Jobel. Is that a thing where it's like, and then she's killed immediately after that? Is that a thing where it's like she should have found a different method of? I don't know. I don't even know what to like. There's two different interpretations of
Mm,
that dynamic. There's the abuse leads to more abuse, and then there's the self loathing leads
mm,
to misplaced affection.
mm,
I think both are interesting to look at, but
mm.
again, I don't. It's hard to tell which one is what they were going for, if any. Because, like I said, that is pretty much the only element of her character that is on display. It's her affection
Yeah.
towards someone who does not want anything to do with her.
Mm. I think there is maybe a bit more nuance than that. The fact that you do have this growth in a character that she's able to sort of find her own sense of I guess her own sense of power, which is what leads her to kill Jobel, but at the same time, that's just kind of another bit of manipulation on Davros's part. Like
Yes,
they're
and I
both
think,
manipulative, but like in different ways. If
yeah,
that
and
makes sense.
I think I'd agree with you if we got to see how finally killing Jobel affected her, like
Mm,
after that.
hmm.
Like if
But
we
we
had
don't
seen
really.
if we had a bit more time with her after that to be like, okay, she's
Mm,
gotten rid of this horrible force in her life. How does that affect her? How does it
mm,
change her behavior? What is she gonna do? Is
mm,
she then gonna go and go? Would she have gone back to Davros and gone, "I've done it, make me immortal," or would she have gone back to Davros and gone, "Okay, you're next"?
mm,
You know,
mm.
it would have been interesting to see a bit more of
Yeah,
how.
you could argue maybe yeah if they worked in something where even if she was the one to not maybe kill Davros but kill the fake head, like if she dealt the killing blow and then maybe she could have been killed by the Daleks if they wanted to still go that bleak
Yeah,
route
I
because
mean,
that
maybe
way
potentially. I'm not even
it would
sure
have
if you
come
need to
full
go.
circle.
I'm not even sure if we need to go that far. I mean, even
Mm,
just seeing how it affects her afterwards, that would have been
mm,
enough. Like maybe she re-enters Davros's chamber, and
mm,
then, either says "I've done it" or "How dare you," or "I see what you've been doing to me," blah blah blah, and then she gets killed. I
mm,
think that would have been just that extra little bit that would have let us go, okay, you know, again, like how is she affected by what she's done?
mm,
Who is she
mm.
beyond what we've seen so far?
Sure, sure. No, it makes sense. Um, yeah, yeah, I can understand why. For me, it's satisfying enough, and again, God, I can't tell you how great it cathartically how it felt just watching Joel get stabbed in the chest.
Oh,
But
it's great, and I'm so happy it wasn't a Dalek that got him. He's like one of the few that doesn't die in this story to a Dalek.
yeah,
It's great that he gets such a retributionist and poetic
yeah,
form of
um,
justice, and a really painful one as well.
yeah. I yeah. I guess maybe it would be a good time to move on and talk about Joe Bell. So in more detail, at least. So yeah, he's a fucking creep from day one.
Hmm.
His interactions with Perry display that clearly. I mean,
Yeah, like
sweet
Jesus Christ, those
Jesus.
interactions, those have aged like like wine. With
Yeah,
the way that people are still, especially women, are still treated by
yeah,
people like Jobel. That is aged beautifully.
yeah. That's the really interesting thing because, as I've said before, God, there are so many elements about Classic Who that do not age well. We've already focused on some of them so far, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and it's even like particularly the way women are framed in the narratives, can be problematic. Um, I was frankly really impressed with the fact that Eric Saywood sort of had the courage to show what this is like. Now, and granted, this is certainly definitely beyond my any sort of lived experience, and someone could easily correct me if I'm wrong, but it would appear that not only is Joe Bell, engaging, especially with Perry, pretty blatant sexual harassment, he's also creating a hostile work environment for everybody else who works with him, in particular Tassim Baker. But
Well,
the fact that
he also says, when the last time Tassim Baker says, makes a move on him, he says, "I could have any woman here."
Yeah, I have the pick of the women.
Which is another layer of that disgusting mentality.
It is, absolutely. There's it's male entitlement, I guess, is perhaps a good way of phrasing it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I admire the courage that Eric Saywood had in really addressing this. The fact that the way he's framed in the narrative, like the first interaction he has with Perry, she literally says, "Get your hands off me, you creep." And it's yes, obviously. So I'm glad that they put it in there. But of course, it's fun. It's odd cuff, but it's really strange that they would do something like that, right? Because it's not meant to be political, right? So.
Well, yeah. I mean, we can't talk about issues.
Yeah, no.
Not until 2018 when the show goes broke because it went woke.
Yeah, exactly. It's not as if they're examining, the way women are oppressed in certain structures. It's not like they were doing that in the 80s or anything. So no, Jesus. Fucking Christ. Anyway, so that's the whole thing. There is actually another small element I want to bring up here, and I noticed it more. I actually noticed this morning before I watched the story again, but then I noticed it even more when I watched it.
Yeah.
So when the Doctor and Perry finally get into Necros, because it actually takes them that whole first episode, which is interesting, and that's a whole other thing. But they finally get there, and then, Joe Bell, the creep, is coming along, and he says, yeah, Joe Bell will look after you. And I just thought, the fact that the Doctor just sort of lets that happen,
It's another instance of the Sixth Doctor really not seeming like he wants Perry around at all. In the first episode, he calls her fat on, two separate occasions. It's really, really weird. It's this it's another example of this this misplaced snarky character of the Sixth Doctor, where it's really not directed in the right places. At least if it's meant to be internally consistent with the Doctor we've had before this. The Doctor's been snarky before, but never to a companion to this extent.
I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not as bad as even Attack of the Cybermen or Jesus Christ or the Twin Dilemma, but
Christ, yeah.
Man, just in my the way I interpret it, I'm man, guys, if you're trying to convince me that the Doctor's not a misogynist, you're not doing a great job.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna lie.
To go from that, he not only does he basically in the first interaction they have in the episode, he calls her fat. Then in an exchange where he calls her fat, he then has her apologize to he doesn't ask her to, but she has to apologize to him for breaking his pocket watch. Which is another thing that doesn't get brought up in the story again after that point, and is really incidental.
Yeah, that was a bit strange, actually.
And then one of the next exchanges that they have is, tell you what, I'm going to do some exploring. Why don't you go off with this guy who's been coming onto you and you're clearly not into it? And you can't take no for an answer. You'll be safe with him.
And the thing is, I don't know. They try to justify it in the narrative, because it's I don't know, maybe if she went with the Doctor, the Daleks would have got it, but she obviously didn't know that, and the audience didn't know that at that point. Yeah. So the very least I can say about that is, man, I cannot imagine any revival Doctor making a move like that. Jesus.
I mean, there's a chance that Jodie would without knowing it was a bad move.
Yeah, but...
I mean, she did... remove a chameleon circuit from a guy and then sent him to the Nazis. She did that move.
Yeah, she did do that.
Sending a woman off with a creep isn't out of the realms of possibility for her if she's willing to do that.
But no, that doesn't make any sense, Cuff, because that's when Doctor Who is meant to be woke. So
Oh yeah, of course, of course, of course. I'm glad you brought up the Doctor because this brings me to another one of my big criticisms of this story. It's how little the Doctor matters to it.
Yes, I was actually going to mention that it's not that element of him, the lack of impact he has in the plot, because I find a lot of the other things in the story quite compelling. It doesn't bother me that much, but I realized, I think even on the first watch, I'm like, you do realize this is like the Doctor doesn't really need to be here, right? Especially given this is such an ensemble story.
Yeah.
It gets to the point where honestly the side characters are kind of more interesting than the Doctor is here, even beside the icky quality of his behavior.
Yeah, well, I equate it to a lot of the Eccleston stories, where we've mentioned before that Eccleston is rarely, if ever, the thing that the person who saves the day or figures out or wraps up the conflict. It's normally a side character, but normally that is because that character has been influenced by the Doctor in the time that they've had together. He's told them something. He's through his actions they've learned a better way, and that's all encapsulated at the end of the season when Rose is like, the Doctor showed me a better way of living life. Like in those instances, it's okay to not have the Doctor to do too much because he's still doing he's still actively taking steps in helping other characters get where they need to be. I don't think he does that at all in this story. I don't think any of the side characters would have done something that they wouldn't have, or did something that they wouldn't have done if the Doctor wasn't there.
When you think about it, all of it. If he wasn't there, would all of the plot have just happened the way it did anyway?
As my understanding, the only thing that would be different is that Necros would have no way of creating its food source after the Doctor leaves, which again goes back to why did you put that in there in the first place? It ties up stuff that doesn't really need to be there at all. You don't have to have the only reason you have this famine is to give the Doctor something to do at the end of the story. Maybe just write the Doctor into your story in a more hands-on way. You don't even have to take any victories away from the side characters. Just have them in some way influenced by his presence there, and then your problem is sorted.
Yeah, because they're not even in the first episode that much. A lot of it is
they're rarely in it, and I just gotta say, that's part of the reason why I found the episode so slow, because I was just waiting for the Doctor to get in there and do stuff. It takes it's very, very rare for a story to be 65% done before the Doctor even knows the Daleks are involved. That to me, you want that is the Doctor Dalek dynamic is one of the best things the show has going for it. Don't forego that in favor of other stuff. And even if that other stuff is pretty good, it's the Doctor and the Daleks, and especially the Doctor and Davros.
Yeah,
that's where the meat of your story should be.
Again, you should definitely check out the story Davros, because that basically makes up for it, because it's mostly just Davros and the Doctor.
Look, once again, I feel like you've been recommending this story to me since I got into Doctor Who.
Yeah,
I'll have to check it out at some point, because otherwise this is just it's our own 10-year unresolved plot thread that we haven't quite gone to yet.
Yeah. But yeah. So also, I'm sure I mentioned before, but Colin Baker really did get. He got genuinely good characterization in the Big Finish stories, as opposed
from everything I've heard, the Sixth Doctor is fixed on Big Finish.
Yeah, whatever. Apart from it isn't whatever the fuck this is. Yeah. So I can understand why there's criticism there. The fact that the Doctor is in it so little. It doesn't bother me because I actually really do like the side characters here. I like Natasha and I can't remember his name, but the alcoholic. I mean, I assume he's an alcoholic guy that she's with. I mean, he said one thing that, and again I wrote it down because it just struck me as rather curious. It's a smaller line, but one of his earlier lines is when they're running around. I think from the guards, he says, I hope I'm getting this right. He says, "I can't tell if the shaking in my hands is the fear or the delirium tremens," and I'm like, Jesus, okay. That's I mean, as far as I understand it, I mean, I don't drink alcohol, but as far as I understand it, like delirium tremens is pretty serious shit. So,
I I wasn't sure how I felt about that guy. I think
hmm.
Grigory is his name.
Sorry. Oh,
Grigory,
Gregory, yeah.
yeah. Because by my money, it's like you're a doctor. If you've taken the Hippocratic oath to do no harm,
Hmm.
I would be very, very opposed to shooting someone. It wouldn't just. I wouldn't just. It would take a lot more than saying a couple of times, "I don't know how I let you talk me into this," to square that with my conscience and the oath that I took.
I.
And also, it's
Hmm.
like, why did he need to be a doctor? Like,
Hmm.
was there anything that they were planning to do once they found Natasha's dad that having a
Maybe.
doctor on site would have? If there was, they didn't really
Hmm.
communicate that all that well. Like
Maybe to.
him being a doctor
Yeah.
didn't really impact the plot, and it lessened his likability for me. Because, like I said, no doctor in their
Yeah.
right mind would do stuff like that if they're taking the Hippocratic oath.
I have a couple of small pushbacks on that. So the first is there is a bit where he is the one to identify, oh, this is the cryogenic chambers. Here's how to destroy these Daleks. I think um, that indicates that he's using his sort of medical know-how to sort of sabotage that sort of thing. So I think that's justification. Granted, maybe not a huge justification, but I think
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
still present.
he could have been a hacker, and you'd have the
Hmm.
same. Like he managed to figure out. He found online the floor plans, and that was basically how he did it.
Yeah. And the other thing about in terms of his characterization, again, I think this is more going to in terms of it's about characterization theme. For me, the world that's being presented here is a very cynical world, a very 80s cynical world. This, in a way, is, as I have alluded to before, it's almost like the cynicism here. It's like a better version of what it was in Attack of the Cybermen. Like, and I think he's fitting into that. And I think even Eric Sayward said that he wanted to explore the fact that this character is very much a coward. Like he says, yeah, I'm a doctor. If they, I hope they kill me quickly, because if they don't, I'm gonna be able to name all the organs that plop out of me.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I can understand why that would frustrate you a little bit, but I quite enjoy it. I think it adds to the character richness and certainly thematic richness of the story. That this world is so kind of fucked up that this guy, he doesn't give a shit about his morals anymore. He's just breaking into a place. I mean, he's helping Natasha, and that's great, but he's obviously lost his moral compass, which is
Sure.
I
Yeah.
find those little foibles kind of interesting. Um, so that's why I find him as compelling as I do.
Fair enough.
Mm. Um, and even like that thing with cynicism, that does kind of help tie a lot of, especially the world building together. Like Tarkus said, this used to be a great place. I enjoyed working here before you came, Davros. But when you think about it, I mean, maybe he didn't know. It's possible he didn't know how much of a fucking creep Jobel was. But I'm convinced that even if Davros wasn't there, Jobel would still be doing all that
Oh, of
shit.
course. Yeah.
And you know, so no, Tarkus, this place actually isn't all that great.
Well, it may be good
This
for
guy's
someone. It may be good for someone like you who isn't the object of Jovel's affections.
yeah,
Maybe take your male privilege at the door and focus on the people who are actually being victimized here.
yeah. But yeah, no, of course it wasn't a good place
Yeah.
before Davros showed up. So again, those little elements help for me to help with the world building and especially the thematic richness here that you really see. Man, I think who was it? Was it Terry Malloy? Someone described this story as very bleak, and yeah, um, it is. It is a pretty bleak story. Not just because of the content, but again, a lot of it has to do with implications and theme and tone, even.
Yeah. Look,
So
I
that I think is worth pointing out.
sure
Mm.
that's fair enough.
Hmm.
And I'm not discounting that a lot of that character and theme stuff is there.
Hmm.
But for me, I just I needed a bit more on the plot side.
Sure.
I
Sure.
if for me, like if a lot of that stuff doesn't make sense, or
Hmm.
like for me, if I can't really connect a bunch of the plot
Hmm.
threads in a way that makes it satisfying for me,
Hmm.
especially if some of those like weird plot threads are feeding into character and theme.
Hmm.
For me, it's just like, okay, well, you wanted to explore this theme, but you didn't really work out how to integrate it into your
Sure.
plot properly, so you just sort of tossed it in.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I don't think
Sure.
that's as clever of a writing style as it appears or I would like it to be. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what's sort of preventing me from getting over that hurdle and
Sure.
really enjoying the story, because there is a disparate tone between the plot, or not necessarily a tone, but there is a divide between some of the plot elements and a lot of the themes that they're
Mm-hmm.
bringing in, and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't all fit together as nicely as I'd want. And you combine that with stuff like the Doctor being kind of unlikable and not really taking a role in the story, which I don't normally have a problem with. Like, there are a lot of Doctor Light stories that I think hold up incredibly well, but
Yeah.
even they, like, often, but it's always like when the Doctor isn't there and there's a good reason for it. Here,
Sure.
the Doctor isn't there because it took him a long time to get over a wall.
Yeah.
Like, it's not as
Yeah.
compelling as I'd like it to be for leaving the Doctor
Yeah.
out of it for so long.
Sure thing. That makes sense. I want to talk about Bostock and Orsini for
Okay.
a minute. I do quite like those characters. They're meant to be. I think Eric Saywood. I think even Graham Harper said that they are meant to be like the pair in Don Quixote. And you can kind of see that, like the fact that Orsini is this a knight basically. And he's obsessed with honor. The one thing that it didn't ruin it for me. It still helped with the plot and certainly with characterization. But the one thing that I was a little bit confused about was his motivation for doing this, because there's no real financial incentive to it. But that, like, he's basically a hitman, yeah. So you'd imagine there'd have to be some kind of financial incentive to do this. But
Oh, he was.
that's not.
I'm sure he was promised something.
There isn't. I don't think it's. I mean, if he was, that it's not really established terribly clearly, because all they keep harping on about is that this is going to be an honorable kill for him. He says, "Oh, finally, Bostock, we're going to be, being on the right side here. We're going to kill for a good reason." And he wants that honorable death. That seems to be his main motivation. That, in a way, I find interesting because it makes him a bit more unique. He's not just a greedy thug looking to get the money. He's got sort of that code of ethics that makes him, I think, a bit of a richer character. It is quite interesting, I must say, that, like, I talk about duplicity and cynicism and elements of characterization. There is an unpleasant element, I think, about Orsini and Bostock, that they are, like, they're hitmen, right? They kill for a living. That sort of marks their personalities. But in a way, they're like, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say they're like genuinely more honorable than anyone else in this story, but they're not. I don't think they're as duplicitous as the other.
They're honest, yeah.
Yeah, they're honest. They are maybe a little bit duplicitous, but not like the other characters.
Yeah.
And honestly, in the end, I did feel quite a bit of pathos when they're dying. When you've got Orsini there with Bostock's head in his lap, it's really, it's quite, like, it's fairly moving. That his best friend's dead, and then he just says, no more words, and then that's it.
Yeah.
I like those characters for those reasons. I found it
Yeah.
quite interesting.
I think that I've just looked over the transcript. There's nothing in it that overtly states that there's like a financial motivation for Orsini. I would imagine that because he's so prolific, they would have had to have offered him one to get him there in the first place.
Yeah, they probably would have.
Yeah, and then when he learned it was Davros, it was like, oh, finally, I can get out of this life. I genuinely like the idea of an assassin who used to kill for good reasons, but then through reasons or another has just become basically a hired gun.
Yeah.
And then being like, okay, I get to do one last big honorable kill, and then I'm out.
Yeah.
That for me is like a really compelling character. I really liked Orsini and Bostock in this.
Yeah, they were good. They had a fun sort of repartee together, and they really sort of helped, I think, make the whole story more compelling for all the reasons we've just stated, which is really cool. There was something. Oh yeah, so there are other little bits, like with the dialogue, that I do enjoy. Like, okay, so when Kara is explaining about the transmitter and things like that, there's a lot of little bits in the dialogue which they almost don't seem to work, but they make them sort of work in the end, which I quite like. Like when it says, "Oh, it's pretty big," and then Kara's like, "Oh yeah, no, it's because Davros is hidden deep underground in the catacombs." There's something about that almost seems ad hoc, I guess. Like, it seems like that they've just added that on to say, "Oh, we have to deal with this big clunky thing that the props department had to make at the BBC that day." But it works enough, and not just for that reason, but I don't know, because it's adding that extra detail, I find it quite compelling. And even other bits where the characters Bostock and Orsino are essentially explaining who they are, that runs the risk of making it like bad dialogue. Like I've already mentioned before in plenty of other examples that too much exposition can be a real problem. But here I think it works because, as something you've sort of touched on before, it's built on a rich character. Like, like you've said, like if a character is rich, it'll come out naturally in the
Yes.
dialogue. And even if there is a bit of exposition here, the richness I think is still coming out, which I really enjoy.
Sure.
Um, so yeah, I think that's worth pointing out. Um, yeah, it's Kara and Vogel. They're a fun little pair. They've got that. There's almost like a Lord and Lady Macbeth quality to them. I love that bit where there's a shot of them, drinking wine, with their arms laced in each other. That's kind of fun. I think the guy who played Vogel said that, yeah, she was meant to be like a evil queen from Snow White, and he was meant to be like some sort of Uriah Heep character, which is quite funny. But yeah, I enjoyed that. I thought that was fun enough. I want to actually give a small shout out here to Graham Harper, and his direction because I actually think it's pretty good.
Yeah, I
The
agree.
just the way the camera moves, I love the bit where they open, where you first see the inside of Necros, and they've got that nice backward tracking shot where you see the whole thing. There's just something kind of grand and there's almost like a Catholic sort of symmetry to that image, and it just makes it look, grand and compelling, which is really great. And other little things too, like um, when Davros offers Tassin Baker immortality, and she's like, "It's an offer," and then you think, well, yeah, why doesn't she refuse? Doesn't she know how bad being a Dalek is going to be? But then you see in the foreground the eye stalker of a Dalek just coming
Yeah,
in,
that
and
was
it's like,
really
oh,
nice.
okay, she's sort of kind of being threatened, coerced a little bit, and
Yeah.
it all just kind of works. So little things like that, and just nice use of close-ups. The close-up of Natasha's father's eye when it opens up, it's just again so icky and kind of
Yeah,
shocking
yeah.
and things like that. And overall, I think the production values, especially for Classic Who, are pretty good. The sets are really interesting and grand. They look really wonderful and elaborate. The special effects, the practical effects are pretty on point. Again, Mutant Dalek just looks so great, and it's just little things like that that really sell it for me. And again, it is possible that it's tapping into more the horror fan in me because, as I said, it is combining sort of elements of black comedy and horror, and those things. I know they resonate with me in a particularly interesting way. So yeah, I think it's worth pointing out. Also, on the topic of black comedy, there is quite a lot of it here. There's little funny little things like even if they do some kind of ludicrous and silly, like when Jobel is like, "Are you picking your nose?" It's like it's so stupid, but it's just enough to make it work. Or when that one line, which even Terry Malloy points out how kind of fun it is um when the doctor says, "But don't you think they would have minded if they knew they were eating their own relatives?" And Davros is like, "Certainly not. I believe that would have created what I believed is termed as consumer resistance." And it's just yeah, it's just really funny, and I really enjoy it for all those reasons.
Do you want to give this a score?
Yeah, so I think overall, your the flaws you pointed out, I think are worth acknowledging. And I think it's like the fact that it has such a good reputation. You begin to wonder, well, is that because it's just in a Doctor's era where many of the stories aren't particularly good? That's entirely possible. Um, um, So I think that's all pretty fair, but I still do find it very compelling, and the bits that I do enjoy. Again, some of the elements, particularly the Doctor's characterization, are a little bit sort of ethically icky. That does knock it down a little bit for me. And again, the presence of the Doctor himself isn't massively important to the plot, so again, that also knocks it down for me. But overall, I think I'm still going to go with an 8 here.
Cool. Um, I I'm not nearly as enamored by this as you are. I think that
Sure.
a lot of the character and theme stuff is really nice,
Mm-hmm.
but the plot doesn't do enough to support them
Mm-hmm.
or even justify them that
Mm-hmm.
much. Um, so I think before this discussion I would have said 5, but I'm up to a 6 now.
Sure.
Um, Yeah, I also think for me, like you're right to point out that these are good like character
Mm,
studies for a lot of the side characters. But
mm.
for my money, Resurrection of the Daleks is a better character study for the Doctor himself, and I
Oh
would
yeah,
much
no, I
rather watch a character study of someone we're going to see again than
sure.
character studies of people who die
Yeah,
largely in the midst of it.
yeah, that's fair. Yeah, and certainly, yeah, you're absolutely right. Even though you could argue there are better character studies of the Doctor, I think.
Well, yeah,
I mean, better even than Resurrection. For
yeah, yeah, yeah.
instance, to take it to another Eric Saywood story, Earthshock, I think it does a really good job. But um, for what characterization we get in Resurrection, yes, no, it's definitely better characterization for the Doctor than here because poor Colin Baker, God love him,
Jesus
he's trying
Christ.
his best, man, with what he's been given. I'm so glad that he kind of got his own back in the Big Finish stories. But yeah, I can definitely understand why that would bother you here because
Cool.
it's not a great Doctor story.
No,
So
it's not.
yeah, that's all fair.
So next time we're going to be looking at the Pearl of the first half of series two, the Girl in the Fireplace.
Hmm.
Um, it's going to be interesting to watch back. Given that we've discussed how icky we feel about Doctor Human relationships, Girl in the Fireplace is almost entirely built around one. So
Oh yeah,
it's
I
going to be interesting to see how this
like
one holds
no,
up
I knew
compared to the
about that.
others.
I knew about that, but I'd almost forgotten about it. Shit.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to see if we feel the
Oh.
same way about it here that we do about it in other situations, like with Rose, Amy, and Clara. Because I don't know, like, I think, I know, maybe it will be different in some way. Maybe it is, like, an
Hmm.
exception that proves the rule. I don't know. We'll have to.
We'll see. I'm sure I'm gonna have enough to say about it. Well, maybe probably not too much because it is a pretty damn good episode from memory.
Oh, yeah.
But you know, another Stephen Moffat story.
We're
Yeah,
getting
that's
closer.
I Jesus Christ, God help me. I wish I was being ironic about that, but man, I'm really nervous about that cuff. I'm not gonna lie. I'm really nervous about how the Moffat era is gonna go down. Um,
I cannot wait.
I honestly think I might actually get quite a bit angrier about Moffat than you do about Rose. I really believe that.
Well, stay tuned, audience, if you want to see the progression to that over time.
Uh, that'll be something.
Until then, I'm Alex.
I'm Fitz.
And also in 2 weeks is the final part of our Davros marathon
Yes,
with
yes,
Remembrance. So
that'll be quite good.
yep, looking forward to that. But until then, uh, you are what you eat, or in this case, you eat what you are.
Indeed.